Why did a blade like this become more popular than a blade like this? Hey guys, it's the Scholar General, 墨战队兵. If you Google the word Chinese sword, a lot of the times you'll see something kind of like this, where you have a discard and a slightly curved, single-edged blade. But earlier on in Chinese history, a lot of swords were actually more like this, where you have this much narrower, single-edged blade, and you have guards that look quite a bit different. Now, what happened to Chinese swords like this, and when did they disappear, and did they disappear completely? That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. So right here, I have the Tang Dao, and the Tang Dao basically represents this horizontally suspended Dao from the Tang Dynasty, which goes from the 7th to just the beginning of the 10th century. And during that time period, Dao or single-edged swords across Eurasia were, fairly narrow, had one edge, and they primarily can be broken down into 3 different blade types. The first blade type is a triangular cross-section where it's just like a straight wedge and the blade is just shaped like that and goes all the way to the tip. The second one is something that's more like a pentagon or maybe a house shape where you have, it's like, imagine a rectangle that you sharpen one side of it, and it has, what that is characterized by is like this, along the middle of the blade it'll have this ridge where it goes straight to a steep edge. So the third kind is one that's like this blade here, where it's triangular all the way down the blade, except towards the end where you have a sharpened back edge or a false edge. So it's really difficult to say which of these 3 blade types was most common during the Tang Dynasty, but we do know that this horizontal suspended single-edged sword, or the Hung Dao, was, the main sidearm for the military, and it would, it could be used with a shield or by itself or on a horse, and it was just kind of like the mainstay that you would always have at your hip whenever you're not, using a spear or shooting a bow. But what happened after the Tang Dynasty? Do later Chinese dynasties still use swords like this? Well, mostly no, but partially yes. And well, let's get into that. So immediately after the Tang Dynasty, you actually have the Liao Dynasty and the Song Dynasty. The Liao Dynasty existed in the north and the Song Dynasty existed in the south. The Liao Dynasty was fairly different from most Chinese dynasties because it was founded by these people who came from the steppe. They were like proto-Mongolic people, so they're similar to the Mongols, but before the Mongols. And they're called the Kitans. And the Kitans, they were quite fond of swords like this, and they had a lot of, single-edged, straight, narrow blades that can be still found in many of their graves today. And one important thing here is that we know a whole lot about Khitan blades, and possibly much more about Khitan blades than we do about Song Dynasty blades, because Kitans, their burial culture was very different from, what it was like down in the Song. That leaves us with more swords. Now, during the Liao Dynasty, most single-edged swords, or Dao, were shaped quite like this one, where it's fairly long and narrow, and it either has like a triangular or, a pentagon, pseudo-wedge-shaped cross-section. But we also start to see the introduction and use of swords more like this one, where we have a slightly curved, quite broad, saber-like Dao, and sometimes we see more unique, handguard designs, like here I have a disc guard. Now over time, these long, narrow Dao would be phased out in favor of broader, more curved Dao. And the reason why is a complicated topic that deserves its own video, but basically it's connected to horseback riding and fighting as a cavalryman. However, this Tang Dynasty blade design, where it's, straight and has a triangular cross-section, did not disappear completely, and it actually lived on in a few places. And one way that it persisted was what's called a Trepaidal, and Trepaidal literally just means straight back Dao. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, this was a term to connotate swords like single-edged sabers that were completely straight. It's known that it was basically an old, antiquated form of Dao that was not as common as the curved ones, but still, they did exist. Also, one important place where Trepaidal or straight Tang Dynasty style Dao existed was in Tibet. Now, during the Tang Dynasty, Tibet was a huge power, and it was a giant empire that was a rival to the Tang Dynasty. People don't talk about it as much, but it was super powerful, cannot be overlooked. It's way underrated in my opinion. But despite that, even later on, Tibet was always kind of a bigger force than people imagine it was in, East Asia in general. And there are a lot of things about Tibet are interesting because their weapons and armor, particularly lamellar and Dao, preserve characteristics that were found much earlier during periods like the Song Dynasty. If you look at Tibetan single-edged swords called Dpa'dam or Tpa'dam, then they look quite similar to Tang, Liao, and Song Dynasty Dao. Now, it's interesting to think about why that might be, and I'll make a video later about that. But basically, the point of this video is just to say that this Tang Dynasty design, goes on a little bit into the Liao and into the Song Dynasty, but then it gets, mostly when the Mongols come down into China, they take the curved saber and they, make it the mainstream. And after that, these single-edged swords live on in Tibet. Alright everybody, thank you all for watching. Let me know what comments and questions you have down in the comments below. Please subscribe if you want to see more, and don't forget to stay sharp.